Just hello, everyone. My name is Tosca Di Matteo, and I'm super excited for today's edition of Talk About It Tuesday here on LinkedIn Live. For those of you who maybe haven't seen me before, I am the founder and CEO of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and my mission is to ignite corporate culture revolution. And you can learn more about me at toscadimatteo.com. What I do with this, I've been doing this Talk About It Tuesday platform. Actually, it's coming up at a year in August. And why I do it is because I want to bring different voices and perspectives to the table in the arena of personal development and growth, and also leadership, and how we can think differently about corporate culture environments to create more healthy workplaces. So I'm really excited for today's edition with Elliot Lum, who we met years ago in our career pathway and have and stayed in touch. And he is just like a wonderful human being, Elliot. Like, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this and share this content with the world that I think is just so important. And yeah, I mean, I want to pass it over to you for you to introduce yourself. Tell the audience anything you want to share about yourself, your journey, like what you're passionate about, and yeah, like where you live, all that good stuff, all the basics and all the deep stuff, wherever you want to go.
Sounds good, Tosca. Thanks again for having me, and appreciate what you're doing, which is really important. And thanks for giving me the space to talk about this. So my name is Elliot. I've been a lifelong marketer for 2 decades. Pretty long, I guess, to say it that way. 4 different companies, one in a research capacity at corporate executive board, another at Colgate-Palmolive, another one at Sony Music, specifically Columbia Records, where Tosca, you and I met, and then finally now at the Association of National Advertisers. So have been doing marketing in different kinds of capacities, and right now really advocating for marketing as a voice for good. So I'm excited to be here at the ANA. And then, just like a little bit about me personally, I have, we were talking about before, Tosca, like I was a nationally ranked chess kid when I was chess champion when I was a kid, like 8 years old. I retired when I was 12. Like it was too much, doing too many tournaments, and wanted to do other things. And I've actually rediscovered it, not by playing in tournaments anymore. I probably would get crushed, but by actually, I was an art history major at school, and I've always wanted to be more of a creative. So I've been using chess as a medium to replay games with paint that I can use the pieces as brushes on a canvas to make art. And so I've been doing that now for about 2 to 3 months. It's been very enjoyable. It's actually allowed me to reconnect with a lot of my friends in the chess world. And so I hope to continue to do that. But that's what I've been doing a little creatively on the personal side, and on the professional side, more on the marketing front.
Yes, I love that you're sharing about this chess because, well, for a number of reasons. Mostly because I think it's so super cool for people who don't know, go check out his Instagram. It's really cool what he's doing. It's Elliot Lum is your Instagram handle, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing is that in the work that I do, right, just embracing all the parts of us and honoring what brings us joy, I think is just one of the keys to life. So I love that that's back in your life. I don't know if the Queen's Gambit had anything to do with it, but
actually, I still have it. My chess friends tell me that it's actually a really good representation of what happens in the tournament room. So I trust I actually have not seen it, but I know that it's a high quality show. So
yes. Oh my God, I can't believe you haven't seen it.
I do intend to watch it.
I gotta tell you, my husband and I watched it, and he started playing chess as a result, and which is apparently a phenomenon, right? You coming from marketing, right, will appreciate the insight of how that show drove chess sales.
Absolutely, to new heights.
Yes, yes. And I popped in your website for folks in the, in the chat there, so they have that. Um, and I would love to hear more about how this, passion project for you came up in the past year around helping educate folks around being an ally to stop Asian hate, like where, like maybe a little bit of the origin to set that up.
Yeah. So last year, I the pandemic started impact many people, and I still remember, there's this virus here coming from China, and I was reading a New York Times article that was said something to the effect of spit on, yelled at, attacked Chinese Americans, like fear for their safety, and I think that was a really riveting moment for me. I am 2.5 generations in Chinese American, grew up in a Boston suburb, Newton, Massachusetts. Like I speak more Spanish than I do Chinese. Like I'm very Americanized. I mean, if not just American. Like my roots in China don't necessarily, extend back. We don't go back to our homeland at all. So like, my Asian identity has been just more like my American identity. And so I think like that moment when I read that article, like I was absolutely riveted. I felt for the first time, like, yeah, like I am 100% like Asian American, and being in the position that I'm in, which is I work with marketers, I was thinking, well, maybe I should champion, how to actually respond to this through the voice of the marketer, specifically the Asian American marketer. So I ended up making about, I don't know, 100 calls, different marketers, to advertising agencies, to nonprofits, to just try to understand like what was behind this and what we could do about it. And so it allowed me to talk to all the different groups like Stop Asian Hate and Act to Change and Gold House and all these other nonprofits, and then the agency community, and then of course the marketing community, where I was like, listen, marketers have this privilege in society. We should use it for good. And so this was a chance for marketers to come together and respond. So about 25 of us came together, and from all different kinds of industries. But Tosca, I think like once you get into a marketing community, it's hard to agree on what you want to do, particularly when it's like from different kinds of companies like Sephora or from Ticketmaster or from Google. Like everybody's got a different point of view. So I don't think there was not any specific action that came out of it. The only sort of major material piece that came out of it was an initiative that the Ad Council launched, which we helped amplify and support. But in terms of like the group, I think it was more of a fellowship that happened, which I think kind of continues on today. So from that 25, it's now like 150 plus marketers. And I think the most powerful thing for everyone there is like the ability to see each other and know that they're not alone. Because I feel like Asian culture in particular is a very heads down, independent driven sort of culture. And so you look up and you're like, wow, like there are other people that look like me. And so I think there's a comfort factor in that. So
yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like first of all, it makes so much sense that people want to be be around others and know they're not alone, especially during challenging times and scary times. I think the other thing that I love about the story is that, you were impacted and you were driven to like do something with what you have access to and resources for, which is beautiful. And I think, not everybody makes that choice. So I just want to like acknowledge that. Like, I think it's amazing that you did make that choice in that moment to say, there's something I can do and I want to do it. And I know like what you're doing has far reaching ripple effects, as all change does. Like what we choose, like just each action we take in a forward way is important. And yeah, and I think your point about everybody has a different opinion, right? And so just taking initiative to say, well, how can we just have a conversation and see where it can go? It can be easy to, I think, get very discouraged when it comes to taking action about things that are sensitive. Like you said, everybody has different opinion. But it sounds like even just by bringing people together, that's created momentum. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's it's the ability for, and it's interesting. Like everybody, when you're a marketer and Tosca, being in the space, you're like, what's your objective, and how do you, what's the action plan, what's the timeline, and so that sort of approach was very much present in our discussions.
Mm.
And I think, taking a step back, like a lot of this is not, it's not like a sprint, right? It's very much a marathon, and like the fight for like racial justice, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens, with time, with energy, with the right kind of commitment. And so I think our rational brains as marketers are like, what's the objective? How do we deliver against it? The emotional side is much more, how do you just let it be what it is, and let people feel a sense of community without actually there being a community beforehand. And so like when I was at Columbia Records, I used to do a lot of like curated sessions. I think you might have come to one or two, like when I would do my studio sessions and like bring in an A&R person and then some brands, or if I did it at a restaurant where I'd bring out an artist, and it had to be like the right look and feel. And like, who knows what's going to happen out of it, but if everybody feels like a sense of belonging and feels like connected to that particular moment, they're more likely to kind of want to do more with you. So and so that was sort of the principle that I took with like this community, which is, like some people may be more engaged than others. Some may want to only engage once a year, but you take it where they are, and keep on encouraging everyone to be part of something bigger than themselves. And I feel like that's what I tried to do by making a lot of calls. And it didn't really require like, okay, we're building a product and like we're asking for money from anybody. It's literally just setting up some Zoom calls that allow people to see each other and like curate it in a way that lets people feel like they're, again, connected to something bigger.
Yeah, well, and I would argue that time is an even more valuable resource than money in this day and age that we live in. But yeah, I think that I think let's get into it, because I I think that the education piece is such a great place to start, just in terms of, how do you start to move the needle, and give people ideas about what they can do. And I just love everything that you shared about you meeting people where they are. You kind of don't get too attached to the outcomes. You're just doing what's in your heart to do. Like, these are really great themes that I hope people also take with them as it relates to what they're passionate about, in this space of social justice and everything that we're talking about. So, yeah, I know you have like a presentation here, that we can share.
Yeah, I can go ahead and share that. And just to set it up is just that
Yeah.
it's I mean, this is a very, it's a high level overview of what's happening. There's so much more richness to it. I think it's just more of a, what I'll call like a marketing version of what's going on, in terms of just making sure that it's consumable. It kind of just gives the highlights. I'm by no means an academic expert. There's certainly professors out there who are much more versed, but for those who just have like a very limited or even baseline or just no knowledge, like that's cool. Like this is sort of the Cliff Notes version of what's going on, just so that people are aware. So I've been giving this sort of presentation to different companies who want to invite into the space, particularly during Asian Heritage Month, which was in May. And so let me just share my screen. And
Yeah, I'll pop it
here we
on.
go. So it's basically divided into 5 parts, Tosca. The first is just what's going on today. Number 2 is just what's the macro impact. The third is talking about the model minority casting. The fourth is historical roots. And the fifth is just ending with like an Asian American story. And so I start with like, the tragedy in Atlanta several months ago. I think this is what really galvanized a lot of the API community overall. It's also to acknowledge like there have been a lot of like mass shootings that have also been really, really tragic. This one in particular impacted the Asian community because it was targeted to Asian-owned businesses. And then this was after a week before that, President Biden went on to the national air and said, it's wrong. This Asian hate, it's wrong. It's un-American. It must stop. And then the tragedies actually happened a week after. But it has been sort of picked up in mainstream media, really kind of crescendoing at that Atlanta moment, but certainly building up at that time. And just here are a couple of like incidents that have happened in terms of just some of the physical violence. So here's just one clip. So somebody getting mauled in the street. And this was another seminal moment to a Thai man, Visha Ratanapakdi, who got bulldozed in that clip and unfortunately passed away from it. But that was another moment for the Asian community to kind of come together. And that wasn't an isolated incident. Here's another one. There's just, and you see these incidents, I mean, particularly happening to both the elderly and to Asian women, who are the most vulnerable in the community. And this hate is coming in different forms. On the top left-hand side was an incident of somebody getting beaten in the street, a woman getting beaten, an 8-pound woman getting beaten on the street, and there was a video camera that was filming it, and then the people who were inside actually closed the door and didn't actually rush out to help. On the bottom left-hand side was somebody got cut across the face with a box cutter, and on the top right-hand side is somebody who was punched. But I think the number of incidents have been like, I think reported in 1 year about 6,500 or so reported by Stop Asian Hate. And we think that's actually probably an underreported number, given the fact that a lot of people don't report. So, and this is not just like physical, it's also emotional too. So here's a teacher, for instance, like explaining what Asian people look like.
Their eyes went up, they're Chinese. I know. If they go down, they're Japanese. If they're just straight, you don't know. I should leave
So
right now.
That was just a teacher who was trying to explain what different Asian people look like, and that sort of incident was captured, and she ultimately was fired for it. And then here's a actor who actually explains like what his experience has been like in Times Square.
So I just got hit in the head with a bunch of rocks. I don't know, since COVID, there's been like these new bicycle gangs, and bicycle gangs, it's like a pack of kids. And when I say kids, I don't know, 16 or whatever, 16 years old. And they ride in packs on bicycles, and they cover the entire road, whether it's going the wrong direction or the right direction, and they don't move for cars or whatever. But I just rode by one, and they threw rocks at my head, literally like a chunk of rocks. And then I went down another half block, and I'm assuming there was like another 7 or 8 gonna meet up with their friends or whatever, and another one pegged my head with a rock. I mean, I didn't even say anything, like I just pretend it never happened. But like, what do you even do in a situation? Like it's not worth it for that fight. But no, I mean, there was a policeman right there, and I was like, yo, these people just threw rocks at me, and they were like, yep, but.
So again, just to give you a flavor of some of the incidents that have happened. And then when you look at the fact that even Olympic athletes are not immune. So this is Chloe Kim. She won a silver medal when she was 13 in snowboarding. And she says here, it's like, listen, like I won this medal, but like people belittle my accomplishment because I was Asian. They told me to go back to China, even though she's Korean. and stop taking medals away from white American girls. And instead of a moment of like happiness, it's a moment of sadness. And, you know, it also happens internationally as well. This is a Korean soccer player who, like, he didn't, I think he was targeted because of a play in the game. And so, like, some of the Twitter remarks that came out, like, this is actually probably some of the more, what I'll call innocuous comments about that incident. But it's not just, again, happening to some folks in the community. It's happening on these like athletic stages as well. So it's happening across like all geographies, and this is data. It's a little bit old. It's, you know, March through August of last March through August of last year, or August through March of 2021, in terms of like through California, New York, Washington. So, you know, it's not necessarily in just California, New York. It's representative across different states, as well as multiple ethnicities as well. So it's not just Chinese, right? But it's Korean, Vietnamese, Filipino, and Japanese. And so there's a lack of distinction across all different ethnic cultures. So, you know, from a macro impact, you can see that, you know, the coronavirus has certainly impacted a lot of businesses. In particular, it impacted a lot of the Asian-owned Asian enclaves. So you can see here, like, for instance, that's why I started. This is MasterCard data from New York City. And so you can see that New York versus Manhattan, Chinatown versus Flushing and Jackson Heights, like, certainly a more dramatic impact that's happening in places like Manhattan, Chinatown, just because, like, people don't want to go, right? They were afraid of, quote unquote, catching the virus, as a lot of people conflated the virus with the people who are Asian, which ultimately then has led to much of this emotional and physical abuse. And then what you find is a lot of, like, families are not sending their kids back to school. And again, this was from the Washington Post a couple months ago, but it was very prevalent that, listen, like, we're going to have them, you know, stay at home so that they don't have to suffer this abuse and get exposed.
Yeah, and I mean, even you know, in my hairdresser, it happens to be Asian American, and you know, she travels from, you know, Long Island to Manhattan, and, you know, she experiences fear in doing that, you know, and it's, I think, having conversations with people to really humanize what is happening. Because when you look at, I mean, of course, the statistics you share, it's important to see that. It's important to see how the community is being impacted. And also, I think, to not be afraid to hear the stories of, like, what it like, all those videos were just, oh my gosh, you know. And I think that it can be easy, especially with everything going on right now, to want to block it out. And even for me, you know, I have to, like, nobody wants to see George Floyd. Nobody wants to see this stuff either. But we kind of have to, I think, in order for it to make the emotional imprint and to say, this is a problem, and, you know, we all can do something about it in different ways. So I just wanted to, like, I think, again, because this platform is all about, you know, how do we make the change? How do we make a change? And I think that first part of your presentation is so much about really being aware of how people are impacted, because, you know, all of these people are going into jobs and workplaces and environments, and how must they be feeling, and how can we be sensitive to that?
Yeah, I know it's even like myself, like, I feel fearful. It's not a question, I tell people, it's not a question of, like, when or if, it's a question just of when. Like, I haven't experienced it so far in terms of any of the physical or verbal abuse, but I'm definitely much more careful now. Look around on the subway platform, like, and I also check, you know, at my company, I'm, like, asking some of my colleagues who are Asian if they're okay, right? Just checking in. And I think it's a great practice to just ask, right? And Asian culture in general is like, you might not necessarily get a answer or a longer answer, but at least you're kind of gesturing that you're asking, just in terms of like not wanting to share those kinds of feelings. It's like, even if people don't share, at least you're kind of acknowledging that it's there and you're aware that it's there. And I think that's a big thing. So
yeah, I agree with that. It kind of makes me think of people don't know what to do, when somebody passes away. People don't know what to do in these situations. It's like, do you acknowledge it? Do you not? Like, does it make it worse? And I agree with you that acknowledging it is super powerful, even if the person doesn't want to talk about it, but just to know that you have an awareness, I think makes an impact.
Yeah. And I think, I always tell people too, it's a both ends. I mean, you mentioned a lot of all the impact that George Floyd has had and the aftermath, and then, the trials is like a lot of Asians. Like, I remember when a lot of that when that happens, I think a lot of Asians were conflicted. It's like, how do I acknowledge that, which is clearly worse, right, than sort of what is happening in our community. And I think I'm like, listen, like, you are entitled to feel how you feel. I think it's like, how do you create the container for both to be able to be acknowledged,
right,
and do something about it if you want, right? And I think a lot of people play the what's worse game, and so like, okay, this is a lot worse, so I'm gonna make sure that I put aside my feelings. Like, listen, no, like, you have to do both. And I think it was a really an important moment, I think, for a lot of like the Asian American community, about like leaning into that. And I think you now, I still remember when I first presented this presentation at Horizon Media, it was a really emotional discussion because everybody was sharing their stories and being able to I don't know, just people were crying, and like it was this vulnerability that was very real, that just created this empathy with everyone in their company. And like, that was just a very beautiful and courageous thing to do. I will say with like General Mills, like when I did it with General Mills, back to the both and piece, like the Chauvin trial was like, when we did the Stop Asian Hate presentation or discussion, it was called for them Courageous Conversations. It happened like the day of the trial. And I was like, I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Of course they were. And they were like, listen, this is important to actually have within the context of this, because it is a both and. So it's expanding what that container is and being able to have that ability and capacity to talk about both.
Yeah, I mean, and right, we're sitting in Pride Month, right? And, all this intersectionality, all this, like, to me, the umbrella is humanity. Like, to me, it's like we're losing our thread of humanity, and all of it's like, look at everything that we're doing to each other. And it's not a, oh, well, I'm going to ignore all of this. And comparison is so detrimental, I think, on a number of fronts, right? Which is like, we don't have a finite amount of compassion. It's not like if we're compassionate of these people, we don't have the, no, like that's never ending. And I think that's what people need more than ever when we're in crisis situations like this, which is what I would consider a crisis situation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, just I'll go back to the deck so that we can kind of just see the here we go. Just to pick up where we were, which is, I think, a lot of like back to the idea of like, the kids not being able to go back to school, and there's like this mental health toll that's been exacted on everybody, right? And I think like with Asian Americans, it's like this idea of like invisibility, and culturally it's like, heads down, focus on education, don't let sort of like put the blinders on and just like achieve. And so I think like that sense of like heads down like created this idea of invisibility, like we don't see you. And so we're not seeing, to this professor's point, Asian Americans as people of color who struggle with issues of racism, poverty and health inequities, and creating these like mental toll issues or mental health issues. Like when you look at the data, I think Asian Americans are 3 times less likely to go to see a therapist than their white counterparts. So a lot of this masks a lot of these mental health issues. It kind of like brings up this model minority casting. And so this was an NPR article that was done 4 years ago, which says like Asian Americans is this model minority, not quite white, right? And assimilating when it's convenient, but also used as a wedge to, and as an example for other communities to look up to, which ultimately creates this wedge between what's perceived as like standard and what's perceived as like minority. And so what that means is like there's on the one hand, right, you're celebrated for assimilating. You see a disproportionate higher index of doctors, engineers, lawyers, and this sense of, from as I said before, like this sense of achievement to kind of what's the path to a white collar career. And then like on this other hand, still feeling like this perpetual foreigner. And so this was somebody who wrote a message on or an article on Medium, and the only quote that I'll read or the line I'll read is like, throughout my life, I've always seen myself as the other. So I know a lot of people feel like this perpetual foreigner, not quite belonging when people ask you the question, which is like, which I get quite often, which is like, where are you from? And then they're like, oh yeah, I'm from New York, right? But where are you really from? I'm like, well, I grew up in Boston. Where are you really, really from? So it's like this idea that you're not from here. You don't necessarily get that with other maybe communities. It's very prevalent, I know, within the Asian American community. And I think like there's a complexity of finding a voice. And so I really think that this quote, I mean, it's from a student from USC, is a really powerful one. So I'm going to just read it. Mm-hmm. So up until now, I couldn't even consider myself a person of color because my heritage seems so marginalized that I should just be grateful for my privilege and gaslight my own experiences. The model minority myth, right, taught me how to code switch from elementary school onward, act white enough so like I'm trying to assimilate, that I wouldn't make my white classmates uncomfortable, and tokenize my Asianness when it was seen socially acceptable. So I learned self-hatred through the model minority myth. And so I think this is the torment that a lot of Asians may go through, and just trying to find what their identity looks like. And I think like this sort of played itself out. Like when COVID happened, there was a Time magazine article of this doctor who was both celebrated and vilified. Celebrated because he's on the front lines and like helping out with COVID victims, but like when he's on the subway, as we were talking about, like he's vilified. He's go back to China. You're not from here, and would be harassed. And so it's a 5-minute piece from Time that I thought was very poignant. It kind of like points out the sort of this paradigm of like celebration on one hand and vilified on the other. And I think, this is the thing is like it masks a lot of the problems that the community faces, like in terms of poverty and health inequity and access to like PPE funds, for instance, where language translation becomes an issue. And so this is it's a number that looks at like income gap, and Asians actually experience the widest income gap between the highest percentage earners and the lowest percentage earners. So that's what the model minority myth does, is it just says like, listen, like everyone is successful, when very much that is not the case. And then just like finally, I'll end up, Tosca, with just a couple extra slides with just historical roots and an Asian American story. So historical roots, like the idea here is like, listen, like this isn't necessarily new. It's been exacerbated because of COVID, the conflation of race and the and bias and bias with the virus, fanned a lot by the political rhetoric that's happened, and there's a bunch of studies that cite that. But I mean, back in, when you look at like 9/11, right? So 8 incidents are not necessarily repeating itself, and with 9/11, after that week, like 645 hate incidents were reported by SALT, which is a South Asian Americans leading together in backlash against South Asians and Muslims, and Sikhs and Middle Eastern community, Arab American communities. When you go back a couple more years, 1982, like justice for Vincent Chin. So he was beaten to death in Detroit after he came out of a bachelor party celebrating his forthcoming wedding. And this happened because he's not even Japanese, he's Chinese, but there was a lot of concern from American laborers, auto workers, about the Japanese auto manufacturer expanding its market share, threatening American jobs. And so that was a direct impact on somebody who literally was just walking out of a club and unfortunately was the wrong time at the wrong place. Japanese internment camps in World War II after Pearl Harbor. So a lot of the Japanese community were rounded up into these internment camps and isolated for fear of threat in the United States. And then even before that, in 1882, where there was a Chinese Exclusion Act where legally nobody from China could actually enter into the United States for 10 years, and nobody who was already in the United States for 10 years could not be naturalized. So it was a direct, and if you want to see a little bit of that history lead up, and if you're into pop culture, check out HBO Max's like Warrior. I think it's a nice pop culture way of like seeing some of the animosity towards Chinese people immigrating. So the last one I'm going to kind of just talk about and end with is like Minari, an Asian American story. And it's a story about a Korean family moving from California to Arkansas to start a farm for a better life. And it's based on the director. It won a Golden Globe, interestingly, for Best Foreign Film. And even though it's an American film. And the reason why it qualified for Best Foreign Film was that 50% of the film was spoken in Korean. And so it did create and stir up a controversy because it was, again, an American film shot by an Asian American director, Lee Isaac Chung. And I just want to end with a quote because I think, like, what, to your point, Tosca, about saying this is about humanity, I feel like this sort of captures what we all want to move towards, which is Minari is about family. It's a family trying to learn how to speak a language of its own. It goes deeper than any American language and in any foreign film. It's a language of the heart, and I'm trying to learn it myself and pass it on. I hope we all learn how to speak this language of love to each other, especially this year. So I hope that's a nice quote from the director to end on and to create the space to just for this education input for everyone who tunes in about like what's going on and to give a perspective on it. So thanks for allowing me to share it.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing. What a really compelling, impactful presentation you put together. And I think one of the thoughts that's just popping up for me right now is this thread, this history repeating, and very human behavior, and it happens on big macro levels and micro levels, which is this propensity to blame others for our woes, right? It's like, oh, I can't find a job, these people are taking it from me, or oh, like, I have to wear a mask. Like, it's just kind of crazy. And it makes me kind of ask the audience, like, where are we blaming? Where we really need to stop, and it may not be on like this type of level, but I think it is a human nature thing, and it is a behavior that really needs a lot more awareness put on it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, take accountability for what actions you want to take, right? And like small steps can lead to big changes. And yeah. I think, this was a culmination, Tosca, of like, I don't know, a couple hundred calls, like just being curious about it, hearing people's perspective. Like I've definitely developed certain viewpoints that I didn't have before, that I'm like, Like, for instance, a good one is when I talk to a lot of the nonprofits, like I feel like all of them are doing such great work. The challenge is that nobody actually works together in a collaborative way to be able to drive change at a larger level because of just the incentive structure of how things are. So I call it the Hunger Games of nonprofits because everybody's competing for the same funds. So that's why like it's like a feel good mechanism, but who's making like material change? And so as I think about like, if I want to move into the space of, I'm already at a nonprofit, but like, how do you mobilize this Asian community? And the idea is like, listen, like, I don't want to create, and the intention was never to create anything new. It was always to like see what else was out there and then try to understand if there was a gap. And then if there's a gap, then like fill the gap, but make sure that the gap lifts all boats. And I still haven't come to like the strongest conclusion about what that may be, but I also know that I've like tried to remove my ego as much as part of it because it's not about me, right? It's about the larger community of what can be done through each of the leaders who are in positions of power to be able to influence change, because that change is going to be much greater than maybe what a nonprofit can do if you were at a Fortune 500 company. Right. And like you are controlling lots and lots of resources. If we can make you smarter, better, more confident, that probably has a bigger ripple effect than any nonprofit can have in 1 year. And multiply that by 150, like that can have a material impact. But then the question that I always have too is like allyship, and I know that this is what we call the talk, which is allyship with other communities, right? And like, how do you forge those kinds of connections in a meaningful way? And I think there are great institutions like the ANA and the Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing and all these different groups that are trying to break down those barriers and say, listen, they take the both and approach. It's like, okay, we're going to focus on this and we're going to focus on this. And we got to look at systemic inequity and media investment today from a holistic perspective. And the distinction between what's going on in the Black community and what's going on in the Asian community, they're different, but they're both equally important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you bring up is so important, right? Like that there's like a lot of complexity with driving change. And, clearly, we all have the power to influence change. And there are some that have more of that power than others and more resources and all that stuff. And, it comes back to some of the principles about like, how are people being rewarded? And if we're building institutions and organizations that at the end of the day wouldn't be rewarded, right, for doing the right thing, and I know the right thing is, what I mean by that is actually moving the agenda forward, where everybody wins, the community wins that you're trying to protect and help. And those are real, like you said, systemic things, policy things, like HR things, business mechanism things. And so there's so many different places that we could put our energy in terms of like where can we impact and what makes sense. And I love that it sounds like this big experiment to say what happens if we bring these people together? What happens if we have these conversations, and where could it go?
Yeah, I remember like right after George Floyd, or maybe right before, I remember trying to bring together diversity executives at schools, governments, and companies. So like that was my intent. So I got like 15 people engaged on that discussion, and ultimately I'm like, listen, like it's a city by city issue, and like if you're a company or a university in your city, you should be linked up with the city efforts, right? The government efforts. And I think it was a good first discussion. I couldn't sustain it, but it's to your point, like you used the word experiment. And a lot of it is like experiment. Some things have like, like people come and then like, can you kind of sustain it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But you have to see kind of like what works. And it's no different. Like if you're in performance marketing or something, it's like, okay, you do A/B testing. It's like similar. It's like, okay, I'm doing A/B testing about who's going to come to these sessions and who wants to engage and what the feeling of it is and how do I move it forward. And just being open to just showing up, I think is really, just one thing that if you want to make change, like go and learn about it, and find the time to engage with people. Like I learn best by talking to people. So that's the way that I acquire my knowledge, in many cases, but there's other resources that are available. There's the ad councils like, Fight the Virus, Fight the Bias. They have a ton of resources if this is something you want to learn about more. If you're more of like a Instagram kind of Facebook social media, like I think Nextshark is a really good platform for you to subscribe to, because it's Asian American like news, and they report on a lot of these incidents. So you can see it in your feed. If you're more of a doc person, there's a PBS special called Asian American History. It's a 5-hour special that just provides like that historical viewpoint. If you're more of a book person, there's a bunch of books like from, I think Helen Zha's one, ZIA is her last name. It's like Asian American Story, and Kathy Hong Park called Minor Feelings. So again, there's a ton of resources, and it's just a question of like how you like to consume. And I'm sure, and that's the thing is like knowing how you want to consume, like we can like recommend things accordingly, but we just want to make it easy for you.
Yeah, I was just trying to put some and maybe it didn't work the way I did it, because now it's just a combination of like a million but I was trying to put in the comments some of these things you had mentioned. So I'm just going to do them one at a time, because I think it turned out to not work out putting them all together. But yeah, I what you're saying, I think a lot of times what happens with people is they feel like it's not enough. What's the point of me doing this? I'm not going to move the needle. And I think that stops a lot of people from doing anything. And, I think the message I have, and I think what you're sharing is like, you just start with where you are. You follow what works for you. Like you like to have conversations. That's how you're staying informed. And, that it does matter. It does matter. You don't know where it leads, and you don't know what new thoughts you'll have, what new actions will come out of it. And it is enough. It is enough to just place awareness and attention on it and go from there. And actually, I'm also going to post in here for those that might be interested. Next week, I'm hosting with Elevate a workshop on influencing company culture. So for those that are like, I want to do more with my company or where I am, like this would be something that might be of interest. So I offer that up, and every gender is welcome. Elevate is kind of like a women's support platform, but every gender is welcome on the spectrum. And yeah, I think, so you gave some great, like kind of what do I do now? Like what do I do now that I know this? And like, now I'm like kind of like amped up about it. Talked about getting educated, having conversations. And I'm curious, like for those who might have Asian American employees, like what kinds of things can they do to show their support for folks within these communities that might be struggling behind the scenes that they don't know about?
Yeah, like I know what I've tried to do is an easy thing to do, or I don't know if it's easy, but just take the space and take the time to ask. I mean, I know that if you have a big team, like you can set up a discussion around it for sure. I know that some of my Asian American marketing colleagues have done that. Say, listen, like I want to create the space to talk about this, so we will talk about it. Others might just check in, just want to make sure, hey, I saw like these numbers, they're very alarming. Just want to make sure you're okay. But just acknowledgement, I think, is sufficient, and it just depends on as long as you're aware and you take some form of like action to empathize, I think that's a really great first step.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I agree. Empathy. Go figure. As a leadership skill. Yeah, well, this has been really great, and like the first time that I've seen like the full, the full run through, in the depth that you shared today, and again, just really great general awareness pieces there that I think enable us to all kind of go deeper if we so choose. And yeah, and I think the other thing I kind of want to talk about, which is a little bit of a transition before we go, is first of all, are there places where people can go to reach out to you if they have more questions or they want to bring this presentation to their workplace environment? Is that an option? And what would you recommend for that?
Yeah, I just say just reach out to me on email. el@aef.com. So it's just my first initial, last name initial at AEF, which is the educationalfoundation.com. And happy to share this content if you think it's useful, productive, insightful. I think it's just, I'm doing it because I think it's, a good thing to do, and to create more awareness and to create more empathy within organizations. So happy to bring it to life however you want. And this typically is about 15 to 20 minutes, and different organizations have done it in different kinds of ways. Some have been more like Q&A afterwards. Some of them wanted me to moderate a Q&A. Like, I'm totally flexible. So thanks again for giving time to talk about it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So we, it's a heavy topic. It's a big topic. So I was hoping we could end on a little bit more about you and actually like your authorship and your book, for people to kind of hear more about what that initiative was all about.
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by entrepreneurship, and Tosca, you're, as an entrepreneur, your husband's an entrepreneur. Like, you got to have some real like inner drive, like to see it through. And like, I was at Sony Music, Columbia Records for about 6 years. My job was putting artists and brands together in deals to market an album. So did a lot of great deals, met a lot of incredible artists, which is phenomenal. And then like, I just got an entrepreneurial bug of like, hey, listen, like I should go find out like what makes entrepreneurs tick. Like, artists are entrepreneurs. Like, I met a ton of entrepreneurs when we invested in a bunch of entrepreneurs. So I wrote a book about, it's called my Entrepreneurial Confessions. And spent a year writing it, interviewing about 300 younger entrepreneurs. And I captured it in a short story format. So there are about 51 stories in it, divided into 3 major sections. One is like, the personal impact. The second is like professional. And the third is like career models. And so, I have some good entrepreneurs in there, like Neil Parikh from Casper, and Adam and Ryan Goldston from Athletic Propulsion Labs, and TJ Parker from PillPack, who sold to Amazon. So a lot of great, like success stories, but also stories where it's stories of like just getting to the next level. Because I really want to get the emotional, like, why, right? Like, why did somebody actually do it and can sustain themselves through it? And it was almost like a chance for me to see what it took. And like, I'm starting to find like my why and feel better about like that creative center. And it's not the easiest thing to find.
I love that, especially because there are so many people going into entrepreneurship than ever before with the pandemic. There's, so many people side hustling. There's so many people trying to make ends meet with their superpower. So I hope that you get continued readership of your book. And I need to dive in now that, I think when you first launched it, I was like first at the beginning. Now I feel like it's a really good moment in time for me to actually read it as I'm, trying to take my business to the next level too. So Yeah, exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's getting to that. It's like it's meant to be timeless because like, Neil's story, for instance, from Casper, wasn't even about like him scaling Casper. It was more about his time in India and like him starting his first company as like a water filtration service. And so like that was sort of the moments that I kind of tried to capture of like that, like I gotta, against all odds, I'm trying to sort of push through. And so I think,
Is it like aha moments, like of their entrepreneurial journey kind of thing?
yeah, maybe aha moments where they didn't think it was an aha moment. It was like,
Ah,
oh, like I was, like now that you say that, like I see that that was a real seminal forming moment for me to just to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like that's a trait that's carried through my entrepreneurial career. So, um, yeah, I learned a lot from that book for sure, and I certainly have the highest respect for every single entrepreneur that's out there because it's not easy, as you know, Tasca.
yeah. Well, look, I have so much respect for you, Elliot. I mean, first of all, the amazing career that you've had, your openness to just try new things, your entrepreneurial journey as an author, all the things you're doing and taking on. You are multi-talented, multi-dimensional, and I just so appreciate being able to have this conversation with you, not only about stopping Asian hate, but also just a little bit deeper about you. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tasca. Appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And I'll see you guys on the flip side. And again, for those of you who want to reach out to Elliot, el@aef.com, you can find out more about him and his website, elliotlum.com. And if you want to learn more about me, you can visit toscadimateo.com. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time on Talk About It Tuesday. Ciao for now.